Thomas, I think fascinating because it's not just Canada, right? Some other countries are also reviewing their contracts to buy these very expensive fighter jets from the U.S. over trade concerns. What do we know so far about Canada?
So last week, Prime Minister Mark Carney ordered a review of Canada's contract to buy 88 F-35 fighter jets as he looks to build new security relationships that are outside of our relationship with the U.S.
A seismic transformation is shaking America's defense establishment. Something startling is unfolding within one of the nation's critical industries, and our closest ally stands behind it. We'll unveil exactly what's happening later in this presentation. For now, imagine the ripple effects. One of America's most renowned manufacturers is being excluded from a crucial defense contract. Something significant is developing beyond the headlines, and it's about to grow even larger. Here's your clue. A multi-billion-dollar fighter jet agreement, long presumed destined for U.S. corporations, is suddenly shifting in a different direction. Why would a trusted ally make this move? Stay tuned. We'll clarify what triggered this dramatic turn and what it means for employees, taxpayers, and global security. This story is just starting to emerge, and it promises to be a game changer. In Ottawa, the announcement struck like lightning. Canadian authorities revealed a contract worth billions for next-generation fighter aircraft, and they granted it to a coalition of international manufacturers. This represented the first time in decades that a Canadian defense project of this magnitude would completely exclude U.S. companies. These agreements had long been anticipated to benefit American firms in Missouri, Texas, and Washington state. Instead, Canadian pilots will soon operate aircraft assembled in Montreal with engines and vital components sourced from Europe and beyond. U.S. officials in Washington claim Ottawa's choice appears to stem from recent trade conflicts and hefty U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and aircraft components. By selecting this route, Canada delivered a powerful message that it desires more reliable suppliers beyond the influence of volatile trade policies. In realistic terms, it means factories in locations like Seattle and Fort Worth, headquarters to major U.S. aircraft manufacturers, may now find themselves waiting as anticipated orders flow elsewhere. Across America, the consequences were swift and devastating. In Fort Worth, Texas, thousands of employees at a Lockheed Martin fighter jet facility suddenly witnessed their orders disappear. Workers assembled outside the factory entrances in disbelief. Union representatives warned that job cuts were unavoidable, and many employees felt abandoned by an ally they had supported for generations. The atmosphere was equally somber in St. Louis, Missouri, where Boeing's defense sector drives the regional economy. Suppliers spanning from aluminum facilities in the Midwest to electronics companies in California suddenly confronted uncertainty as the expected Canadian demand vanished. Economists cautioned that more than 20,000 American positions could be threatened if this pattern persists, and many smaller contractors could experience severe harm. This isn't merely about corporations, it's communities bearing the burden. In towns throughout aerospace territory, people confront a stark reality. The very tariffs and trade battles designed to safeguard American jobs may have ended up damaging their own communities first. The impact extends beyond economics. Fighter jets have long symbolized American military and industrial dominance. Aircraft like the F-16, F/A-18, and F-35 have formed the foundation of Western air forces for decades. Witnessing Canada, one of America's closest partners, choose something different represents a blow to U.S. prestige. It undermines the belief that America will automatically remain the preferred supplier of advanced defense equipment. Pentagon officials acknowledged they were caught unprepared. They had anticipated routine discussions, not an outright dismissal. For years, U.S. defense strategists assumed American aircraft would control Allied air wings. Now those assumptions face serious doubt. Observers in Europe and Asia have noticed, and some experts suggest, The era of guaranteed sales may be concluding. The fallout quickly became political as well. Legislators from states heavily dependent on aerospace, including Texas, Missouri, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, immediately sought explanations from the administration. These regions depend on defense employment and tax revenue from those manufacturing plants. In Washington, questions multiplied. How could a close ally suddenly sever ties on a major defense purchase? Why was the government surprised? Meanwhile, in cities like Fort Worth and St. Louis, local officials warned that layoffs and revenue losses could devastate neighborhoods built around those factories. For many Americans, it became a sobering recognition that trade conflicts meant to protect jobs might have backfired completely. Experts warned this transcends just one contract. The U.S. aerospace industry represents one of the few sectors consistently maintaining a trade surplus. Each lost agreement erodes that advantage. If other nations follow Canada's example, the effect could multiply. Countries like Poland, Australia, and Japan, all considering new fighter programs, may now be tempted to explore European or Asian designs if they observe Canada securing better deals. That would mean additional orders moving overseas and thousands more defense jobs at risk. It would also drive expenses up domestically. With fewer major contracts, American companies would face higher costs per aircraft. U.S. taxpayers would ultimately pay more for fewer jets, while allies flying cheaper alternatives could save. For many Americans, this development feels like more than lost employment. It's a blow to a national story. U.S. aerospace achievements have been a source of pride for generations. From the Wright brothers' first flights to today's advanced fighter jets, American leaders long celebrated the defense industry as the envy of the world. Now Canada's decision to look elsewhere challenges that narrative. Inside Washington, frustration has been mounting. Months ago, some Pentagon officials cautioned that aggressive tariffs could alienate allies and push them toward competitors. Those warnings were largely ignored amid the headlines. Now, with the Canadian deal completed, those leaders feel vindicated. One defense analyst summarized it perfectly. This isn't just about losing business, it's about losing trust. Economists emphasize that Canada's decision reaches far beyond any single procurement. Aerospace represents a strategic industry intertwining sovereignty, security, and economy. By awarding its fighter contract to foreign manufacturers, Canada is signaling it will no longer depend solely on American sources for its military requirements. That message will resonate worldwide from Berlin to Tokyo. The economic ripple extends deep into supply chains and commodity markets. A fighter jet assembles from components sourced globally: titanium from Canada or Australia, aluminum from the U.S. heartland, advanced electronics from East Asia. If Canada's orders shift overseas, so will much of the demand for those materials. Companies that had expanded their facilities to meet expected Canadian demand now face uncertainty. In Asia, America's defense partners are also paying attention. Nations like Japan, South Korea, and Australia have long built their air forces around U.S. aircraft, but Canada's move demonstrates alternatives can succeed. European fighters like the Eurofighter or Sweden's Gripen were once considered mainly backup options. If Canada can integrate those jets successfully, Asian allies might feel justified exploring alternatives. The financial costs are substantial. Analysts estimate Canada's shift could translate into tens of billions in lost revenue for U.S. defense firms over the next decade. Those orders aren't just profit today, they fund tomorrow's technology. Without those contracts, American companies may have to reduce or postpone research programs. Strategically, the U.S. finds itself at a crossroads. Pentagon planners have long built strategies around the assumption that allies will operate American systems to guarantee compatibility. Canada's decision forces them to reconsider parts of that plan. The U.S. doctrine of one fleet, one fight is being tested by this development. Domestically, the political fallout is escalating. Legislators from aerospace-heavy states are sounding alarms, pointing out that once defense contracts go overseas, domestic factories can face permanent downsizing. Congress members are already pressing the Pentagon and White House for solutions, warning that every contract lost weakens America's industrial foundation. This episode reflects a deeper calculation by allies who feel they need to protect their interests in an era of trade conflict. A NATO partner has just demonstrated it's willing to break with tradition over trade disputes. That fact won't be forgotten. Some analysts call this the beginning of a more multipolar defense economy. The United States will no longer be viewed as the automatic first choice for military aircraft. The narrative that only America produces the best jets is now questioned. For generations, Americans believed their factories would naturally arm not only the U.S. military, but also much of the free world. If that belief unravels, restoration could take considerable time. In Europe, continental NATO members may feel emboldened. For decades, Europeans often purchased U.S. planes even when their own designs were available. Now Canada has broken that pattern, subtly strengthening Europe's position in future procurement and strategy. What happens next depends on Washington's response. The administration faces a critical choice: pivot back to allies or continue confrontation. The U.S. still leads in jet technology. Stealth, avionics, and engines remain world-class. But that advantage won't matter if potential customers refuse to buy. If the White House reduces tariffs, rebuilds trust, and offers more predictable terms, it may slow this trend. But if it continues aggressive policies, other countries will feel justified looking elsewhere. The contracts Canada has signed will be delivered over coming years. Whether this moment becomes a brief setback or the start of structural decline will be determined by U.S. policies going forward. The stakes have never been higher for America's defense industry dominance.